Zara came back to the villa in a state of despair. She couldn't forget Betty's words for a second. Her marriage was already a joke, and now it seemed even more impossible to continue this relationship. She thought about divorcing him. However, she immediately pushed away that thought as soon as it appeared in her mind. She was married only for 1 month. If she divorced now, her mother would be heartbroken. And what about Solomon Grantham? That old man truly loved her. He had so much hope from her. He would never allow her to break this marriage so easily. As their marriage was only for 2 years, she made up her mind not to initiate divorce during this term. After all, Nicholas asked her to act as a good wife during this contract period. After taking a quick shower, she changed into her pink cartoon pajamas. She called her mother and talked for a while before going to bed. But she couldn't sleep immediately. After tossing and turning for a long time, she finally fell asleep. Ding! Dong! Zara just fell asleep when she heard the doorbell ringing. She was startled and jumped out of the bed. She was not sure what time it was, but she guessed that it was almost midnight. Is it him? She couldn't stop her heart from beating wildly when this question crossed her mind. He finally decided to show up. She began to bite her fingers and looked left and right, not knowing what to do. Ding! Dong! While she was hesitating whether she should open the door or not, the doorbell again rang. She flinched and rushed out immediately. She quickly opened the door. Click! However, her eyes went wide to see an unknown man coming inside supporting Nicholas. The strong smell of alcohol hit her nostril, and she raised her hand to cover her nose subconsciously. She looked at Nicholas up and down, completely bewildered. She wondered why he got drunk. Madam, sorry to disturb you at this hour. Boss is drunk. I thought about dropping him off at the apartment, but in this condition, I don't feel comfortable leaving him alone, so I bring him here, Benjamin explained. I understand. Can you help me to get him to the room? Yes. Benjamin took him to the bedroom and laid him on the bed. He took his leave and walked out. After closing the door, Zara came back to the bedroom and gazed at Nicholas dumbly. She didn't know what she should do with him. Her heart was beating uncontrollably. This was the first time she was looking at him so attentively. He was quite handsome, a dream man of countless ladies. His nose was sharp and his angular cheekbone carved down towards flinty jaw. His silky black hair was slightly disheveled, and a few strands fell on his forehead. His crescent-shaped eyebrows frowned a little. His eyeballs were moving left and right. He seemed uncomfortable. After removing his shoes, she took off his blazer. She slowly untied his tie and unbuttoned 3 buttons on the top of his shirt. He groaned and murmured something in his incoherent voice that Zara couldn't understand. She quickly rushed to the bathroom and dipped a towel in the water. She squeezed out some water from the towel and came back to him. She wiped his face, neck, and his hands. He again murmured something, moving his head left and right. His breathing was becoming irregular, and his frown was getting deeper. Zara thought he was still feeling discomfort. She didn't know what to do next. She pursed her lips and looked at him, contemplating something. After a while, she removed his belt as well as his shirt. Just as she successfully took off his vest, he held her wrist and pulled her down. She fell on his chest and gasped. He wrapped his arms around her waist tightly and opened his eyes to look at her. Zara's heartbeat was skyrocketed. She gawked at him, stunned. His deep blue eyes were spellbinding. Zara never made eye contact with him before. This was the first time she was looking straight into his eyes. She couldn't deny the fact that he had the most alluring eyes. Those blue orbs were like magnets that pulled her to them. She forgot everything at that moment and kept staring at him with her wide eyes. This handsome man was her husband. Heaven! She was attracted to him. Sasha! He murmured this name, and Zara came to her senses. She felt like a bucket full of chill water splashed on her. Although she married him, his heart and soul were for another woman. She was nothing but a contract bride that he married due to family pressure. She tried to get up, but he hugged her even more tightly. "Where do you want to go?" he asked in his deep, enchanting voice. Zara was a little flustered. It would be a lie to say that she was not afraid. She knew if she stayed in his arms a little longer, he would cross his limits, and she didn't want that to happen. She squirmed and said, "Let me go." Her voice was as low as a whisper. Within a blink of an eye, he rolled and pressed her under his body. A scream escaped from her mouth. Her hands rested on his bare chest. Her cheeks turned crimson red, and she quickly retracted her hands. "Let go of me. You are drunk. You should take a rest." She tried to push him away, but he grabbed her wrists and pinned them above her head. He again called the name affectionately. He lowered his head and kissed the sensitive part of her neck. Zara's breathing hitched up. A wave of shiver ran through her body, causing her hair to stand up from head to toe. "I missed you so much," he whispered in her ear and bit her earlobe seductively. Another wave of chill went through her spine, and her toes curled up. "Nye. Nicholas." She wanted to say something, but he shushed her. "Don't talk. Allow me to love you, baby." He showered kisses on her neck and shoulder. She could feel his hands inside her top. She squirmed harder. "Stop it. You are drunk. Don't do this. You will regret it when you get sober." She tried to push him away. Nicholas stopped kissing and looked at her. "Why do you say that?" "I love you, Sasha. I won't regret loving you. I am not." The remaining words stayed stuck in her mouth when his lips sealed hers. He was kissing her passionately. The heat was rising gradually inside them. Zara knew he was mistaking her as Sasha. She wanted to push him back, but his gentle touch and his sensual kiss were driving her crazy. She couldn't resist the desire and let him love her crazily. When Nicholas finally stopped his movement and fell asleep, Zara shed her tears quietly. He took her first time, mistaking her as his beloved woman. Zara regretted not being able to control her desire. She was ashamed. The pain in her heart was far greater than the pain in her lower body. She was exhausted because of his torment. After crying for some time, she fell asleep deeply. When she woke up, it was already the next morning. Nicholas was not on the bed. She sat up on the bed and looked around. He was nowhere to be seen. He left already. She felt a twinge in her heart. She thought he would say something to her. More precisely, she expected that he would apologize for what happened last night. Meanwhile, her eyes landed on a small white pill on the side table. She frowned and picked it up to take a closer look. Her eyebrows furrowed when she realized that it was nothing but an emergency birth control pill. How could he allow her to bear his child? A bitter smile surfaced on her face. She swallowed the pill without water and reminded herself again and again. To stay strong, she had to bear it until the term of the contract ended. Avoiding the pain in her lower body, she went to the washroom. After taking a quick shower, she changed into a knee-length blue skirt and a white blouse. She had taken 2 days off from the office to arrange everything for Brian's surgery. However, today she had to go back to her work. She put on light makeup, applied nude lipstick, and held her hair in a high ponytail. Grabbing her bag, she walked out of her room. Just as she came out of her room, a middle-aged woman came towards her. She was the head maid in this villa, as Nicholas did not stay in the villa, and Zara also stayed maximum of her time in her old apartment. The servants came only in the morning for the cleaning. The woman greeted her, bowing her head a little, and asked politely, "Madam, did you take the pill?" Zara was caught off guard to hear her question, but soon she collected her thoughts and chuckled. Bitterness spread within her. She figured out that Nicholas had appointed her to make sure that she took the pill without fail. "Tell your master not to worry. I have already taken the pill." As she said, she turned and left. But before she could take a few steps, she heard her say again, "Pardon me, madam. I didn't mean to hurt you. Master has. You don't have to apologize." Zara glanced at her across her shoulder. "I can understand everything." Her tone was harsh as her mood was sour. Because of Nicholas, her position in the villa became so low that even the servants could question her. If she showed her weakness, they would never give her face. So she didn't talk to her politely and showed her arrogance. She walked out, lifting her chin high, but only she knew how shaken she was from inside. She lost all her hopes from this marriage. Now she was only waiting for the term to end. When Zara reached the office, her friend and colleague Jude Allen came to her with a frown on her face. "Why are you late? Do you know everyone came in an hour earlier today? Mr. Cooper is pretty anxious. He is running around in the office. Everyone is nervous." Zara was dumbfounded. She also noticed the panicked look of the staff when she arrived, but couldn't figure out why they were so flustered. And now, Jude was acting weirdly. She was only half an hour late today, and all thanks to Nicholas. When she recalled last night's madness, she couldn't help but blush. She pursed her lips and asked warily, "Why so? What happened to Mr. Cooper? Oh my God, don't you know?" Jude paused for a while to take a good look at Zara and winced. "TSK, how will you know? You were on leave. Anyway, the new CEO is coming today to take over the position." A wide grin surfaced on her face. "Is that so?" Zara was pleasantly surprised. CliffX was a small startup company that merged with Global Solutions a couple of months ago. She didn't expect that the new CEO would appear unnoticed. Now she could imagine how anxious and nervous Mr. Cooper would be. She asked in a frenzy, "But why is he coming without prior notice? Maybe he wants to check how the work is going on." "Everyone, listen carefully." A crisp male voice echoed in the office before Jude finished speaking properly. All the staff came to an alert and turned to look to the source of the voice, only to see a tall, chubby young man standing amidst the office. He was the VP of CliffX, Mr. Jaden Cooper. Everyone approached him. "The CEO is on the way. He will be here at any minute. I want you all to be polite and sincere towards him. I don't want him to punish any one of you on his very first day." Am I clear to all? "Yes, Mr. Cooper," all the employees said in unison. "All right, Laura, Rose, Jude, and Zara. You should be at the front gate to receive him with bouquets, understood?" "Yes, Mr. Cooper," Laura chimed coquettishly. Yes, we understand, Mr. Cooper. We won't let you down." Rose joined with Laura. "Go get ready to welcome the CEO." Jaden Cooper swept his gaze to all the staff before leaving. "I have heard that our new CEO is pretty handsome," Laura said excitedly. "Not only that, but he is young and single," Rose chirped, clasping her hands together. "Oh, how I wish if he falls in love with me." Rose started speculating on her relationship with the new CEO. "There are so many young ladies from wealthy families who are after him. He is filthy rich. He won't spare a glance at us, let alone falling in love." Another one scoffed. Wet. Their gossiping continued. Zara had no interest in listening to their gossip, but she couldn't deny the fact that she was also curious to know who the new CEO of the company was. Was he cold and aloof like Nicholas? Wait, what was she thinking? Zara shook her head. Why would she compare someone to Nicholas? Let's check the arrangement. She held Jude's hand and walked to the entrance. Half an hour later, a black Mercedes stopped in front of the office building. Jaden Cooper with his assistant walked up to the car. All the pair of eyes inside the office were looking curiously in the direction of the car. They didn't want to miss a single moment to take a look at the new CEO. A tall, sturdy man in his black suit came out of the passenger seat and opened the back door. Now Zara was also eagerly looking at the car. A shiny black leather shoe came out first. Then a tall, slender figure in a gray suit appeared in front of everyone. He was indeed really handsome. Gasps could be heard from the surroundings. Zara's pupils shrunk to see him. She found him familiar, but couldn't remember where she had seen him. "Good morning, Mr. White. Please come in this way." Jaden Cooper politely greeted him and made a gesture to him to go forward. Isaac White nodded and marched ahead, elegantly. "Hello, everyone. He is the CEO of our company, Mr. Isaac White." Jaden Cooper introduced him to the staff. "Good morning, sir. I am Laura from the finance department." Laura smiled coquettishly, passing the bouquet to him. Isaac smiled a little and nodded. Then he glanced at the robust man next to him. The man nodded and took the bouquet from her. Laura was a little disappointed, but she kept her smile on. Jaden Cooper passed a cold look at Laura, but quickly he changed his appearance and smiled. "Mr. White, she is Miss Rose from the HR department." "Good morning, sir." Rose greeted him politely. She hesitated for a moment whether to give the bouquet to the CEO or the man in a black suit standing next to him. Meanwhile, Jaden Cooper signaled her with a scornful glance to give the bouquet. She nervously passed the bouquet to Isaac, but this time also the man in the black suit received the bouquet. They approached further and Jaden introduced. "She is Miss Jude from the Operation Management Department." Isaac nodded curtly, with a stiff smile. Jude passed the bouquet directly to the man next to him, and she is Miss Zara, from the same department as Miss Jude. Isaac glanced at her and smiled a little. Their eyes locked for a few seconds. "Morning." After hesitating for a while, Zara passed the bouquet to the man in a black suit, just like Jude. But to her surprise, Isaac took the bouquet and smiled at her. Jude, on the other end, was about to pass out to see the scene. Rose's jaw dropped, and her eyes went wide in shock, while Laura's mouth twisted in jealousy. Zara only stared at him with her wide eyes, dumbfounded. The more she looked at him, the more familiar she found. Before she could come out of her daze, Isaac White walked further inside with Jaden Cooper, followed by the man in a black suit. "Wow, he took the bouquet from you and also replied to your greeting. You are damn lucky, girl." Jude's words broke her trance. She rolled her eyes and said, "Don't assume anything." She turned and went back to her desk. "I am telling you, he is impressed with you." Jude followed her with a grin on her face. Zara ignored her and began to check a file. Jude leaned back on the desk and continued. "Oh, how handsome he is. I will be jumping and screaming all over the office if he smiled at me the way he smiled at you." Her eyelashes were flapping like those of the butterfly wings. Amusement spread on her face. Zara only shook her head. She had no interest in any man. Her life was already in a mess with the handsome young CEO of the Apex Groups. No one knew that she had married Nicholas Grantham. If the news leaked, all of her colleagues would pass out in shock. Zara couldn't help but thank Nicholas. He agreed to this marriage only if the wedding was done secretly. Only the family members were aware of their wedding. It was good for both Nicholas and Zara. Nobody would come to know about their marriage when the term of the contract ended. But look at you. You are acting so dull as if you are not affected by his charms. Jude slapped on her arm. "Ouch, what is it?" Zara scowled at her, rubbing her arm. "Don't forget he is our CEO. Stop daydreaming and go back to work." Yeah. Jude left, puffing with anger. Zara rolled her eyes and buried her head in the file. Inside, the CEO's office. "I need a secretary." Isaac revealed his wish. "Yes, Mr. White. The hiring process will be done shortly." Jaden Cooper responded politely. "No need to hire now. I want to check with the internal employees. Send some good candidates from the management department. I will take the interview personally." Isaac ordered in his firm tone. "All right. Jaden Cooper walked out immediately. Within half an hour, Jaden Cooper sorted out 10 names from the Operation Management Department who were efficient and competent in their job. Then he circulated an internal email asking the chosen employees to go to the CEO's office for the interview of the secretary's position. The chosen candidates were nervous and excited at the same time, while the others were envious of them. Zara was choked by her saliva to see her name on the list. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Just as she was wondering, Jude came and exclaimed, "Oh my God! I can't believe that my name is on the list. Your name is there too. That means we have a chance to work closely with the CEO." Zara came to her senses and turned her head to look at her. "Don't get too excited. He will personally take the interview." "Did you forget his cold look?" Zara reminded her that the interview wouldn't be so easy. Jude's face turned pale instantly. "Yes, you are right." She took a deep breath and said, "But I will do my best to crack this interview. Good luck." The interview was scheduled after the lunch break. All the 10 candidates came to the top floor of the 5th-story building and sat on the chairs arranged for them in the corridor in front of the CEO's office. All were pretty tense except Zara. Jude was right. Zara was not affected by this process as she was not interested in being the secretary of the CEO. She just came to attend the interview because Jaden Cooper chose her name. She wouldn't be heartbroken like the other candidates if she was rejected for the secretary's position. The interview started shortly. One by one, the candidates went inside the office and came out with flushed faces. Finally, it was Jude's turn after 8 candidates, and she went inside with wobbly legs. Zara was now a little tense. Not for herself but for Jude. Jude was very excited about this interview, and she hoped that she would pass it. She would be sad if she was not selected. Zara truly wished that the CEO should select Jude as his secretary. 5 minutes later, Jude came out of the office with a long face. Zara rose from the chair and approached her. "What happened? How is it?" Jude opened her mouth to say something, but before that, the man in a black suit opened the door of the office and called out, "Next candidate, Miss Zara, come inside." Jude tapped on her shoulder and said, "Good luck." Zara was now palpitating, seeing Jude's troubled look. She didn't know what exactly happened inside the office. Was the interview very tough? Or the CEO was very strict? Zara, who was not affected so far, was a little nervous now while approaching the office. After taking a few deep breaths, she went inside. She saw Isaac White sitting on his seat, looking at a file. His expression unreadable. The man in a black suit was also sitting on a chair next to him. Zara politely greeted them. "Good afternoon, Mr. White." Then, she looked at the man sitting next to Isaac. "Good afternoon, sir." Isaac even didn't lift his head and kept looking at the file. "Good afternoon, Miss Morris. Please take your seat." The man in a black suit gestured to her to show the opposite chair. Zara nodded and approached the chair. Just as she was about to sit, he spoke again. "My name is Joe Burns. You can call me Joe." "Thank you, Joe." She finally sat down on the chair. "So, Miss Morris, how long are you working here?" With this question, Joe started the interview. "This year, I will complete 3 years in this company." "Oh, you are working here quite a long time." Joe raised his eyebrows. "Yes." "Why does Mr. Cooper recommend you for this position out of so many employees? Is it because you are working here for 3 long years, or is there any other reason? Are you close to him? How close are you with him?" "Excuse me?" Zara felt offended by this question. Her expression also darkened a bit. A frown could be visible between her eyebrows. She was not happy with his tone. "You should ask this question to him. He could answer it better." She didn't show any politeness. Isaac finally raised his eyelids and looked at her. He had a faint smile on his face. Amusement was evident in his expression. Joe chuckled and said, Don't worry about that. You are now in the interview, and you should answer my questions. How close are you with him? Zara was literally angry by now. She wanted to walk out of the office without saying anything, but offending the CEO might not end well. She could lose the job. In her current condition, she couldn't afford to lose this job. She took a deep breath to suppress her anger and answered indifferently. I am not close with Mr. Cooper. He was my senior at college. When he established this company, he asked all his friends as well as his juniors to join his company. Maximum of the employees in this company are either his classmates or his juniors. I am one of them. Rest. I don't know why he chose me. Joe cracked a meaningful smile. You are indeed a truthful person, Miss Morris. You are selected for this position. What? Zara was stunned. Her mouth remained open while she stared at him dumbly. You heard me right. When I asked the same question to other candidates, everyone said that they have good connections with Mr. Cooper. They tried to impress Mr. White, showing their connections with Mr. Cooper. You are the only one who didn't entertain this question. You even didn't hesitate to show your dissatisfaction and anger in front of our CEO. I am happy with you, Miss Morris. Rest. Mr. White will assign you your duties. Joe got up from his seat and walked out, leaving Zara alone with Isaac White. Isaac was observing her all the time. The more he looked, the more impressed he was with her. He smiled and asked, Do you remember me? Zara gawked at him with a puzzle written on her face. She indeed found him pretty familiar, but she still had no memory of where she had seen him. She shook her head slowly and replied, No, I am sorry, I don't know you. Isaac chuckled and looked down, only to look up at her again. Remember the incident of 8 years ago? You saved a young man who was drowning in the sea. Zara was now shocked. Only then did she figure out why he looked so familiar to her. 8 years ago, she saved him. That day she went to the beach with her father. She was playing in the water while her father was busy attending a call. Suddenly, she saw a man drowning not very far from her. She swam to him and pulled him out of the water. He was not breathing. She had learned how to provide first aid to save a life in an emergency at school. She started performing CPR along with mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. After a while, Isaac regained his senses, and Zara heaved a sigh of relief. By then, his friends came running there, and she left in a hurry, fearing that her father would scold her if he found out that she went to save someone drowning without telling him. She could have drowned along with the man in the wild waves of the sea. She came out of her trance and asked in a state of stupor, You are that man. I am sorry I couldn't recognize you. It's all right. I also didn't expect to see you like this. If you had not saved me back then, I would never have become a CEO. I owe you a lot. Isaac smiled from ear to ear. Zara was a little shy now, and couldn't find any words to say. Let me know if there is anything you need. Don't hesitate. You give this new life to me. I will be happy to help you. Zara stared at him carefully. She could see the sincerity in his gaze. She only smiles in response. Isaac's heart was pounding. How could he not smile to see such a lovely smile? He mainly came to Bay City to look for her. He didn't know that she would appear in front of him the day he landed here. There was no limit to his happiness. After assigning her work, he resumed checking the files with Joe. At the end of the day, Zara rolled up and came out of the office. She was heading to the bus stop when a black Mercedes pulled over beside her. The glass of the rear seat window rolled down, and the familiar face appeared in front of her. He smiled and said, Come in. I will drop you. No. It's okay. My apartment is not very far from here. I will go by bus, she denied. However, Isaac didn't listen to her. Please, let me drop you home. Zara couldn't deny him after seeing his imploring gaze. All right. She opened the door and sat beside him. Isaac smiled happily. Don't treat me as your boss. Treat me as a friend, and a friend can drop another friend home, isn't it? I don't know what to say. Zara smiled awkwardly. After noticing Nicholas so cold and aloof, she thought that every CEO was like him. She never expected that someone in such a high position to be so friendly. You know, I always treat my subordinates as my friend, especially those who are directly associated with me. Let's say about Joe. He is more like my friend than my assistant. You are my secretary now. I will be happier if you think of me as your friend rather than your boss. Zara nodded and said, I will try. Good. After a few moments of hesitation, Isaac asked, are you free this weekend? His fingers were crossed on his sides. He stared at her inquisitively. At the nick of the time, Zara couldn't understand what to answer. After contemplating for a while, she replied, I am not busy, but I prefer to stay at home with my family on the weekends. She looked at him hesitantly. I understand. He was nervous. He licked his lips and mustered his courage to ask her again. I am attending a banquet this weekend, and I need a female acquaintance. As you know, I am new in the city. I don't know anyone here. Can you be my partner? His throat was dry, and he swallowed hard. Zara thought for a while before answering. All right, I will accompany you. Isaac was overjoyed, but he hid his excitement and just smiled a little. 15 minutes later, Zara asked the driver to stop the car in front of her apartment. Isaac looked at the old multi-story building through the windshield and asked, You live here? Yes, thank you for giving me a ride. Goodbye, Mr. White. Zara was about to open the door, but his next words stopped her action. Call me Isaac. She smiled and said, Okay, Isaac, see you tomorrow. Isaac smiled and nodded. Zara got out of the car and walked into the apartment. Isaac kept staring at her until she was out of his line of sight. In the private room of an upscale club, 3 handsome young men were chatting and drinking happily. The man with dark brown hair exclaimed happily, Oh man! I am pretty happy for you. I still remember how you used to stare at the photo on your phone. Another extremely handsome man said in his deep, cold voice, But he never showed that photo to us. I am bringing her to the banquet this weekend. Isaac smiled shyly. Nicholas, look at him. He is blushing all over. The brown-haired man laughed heartily. Stop it, Noah. I will kill you. Isaac punched on his arm. Noah hid behind Nicholas and exclaimed, Nicholas, save me. Isaac has gone insane. You. Isaac stood up and approached him to hit him again. All right, calm down. Nicholas intercepted the fight. You are still fighting like boys in the school. Only then did Isaac sat down on the sofa, glaring at Noah and tidying his slightly creased gray suit. And Noah! Nicholas yanked his arm and pulled him out, who was hiding behind him. Stop teasing Isaac. It is good that he finds her after so many years. We witnessed his silent love for that unknown girl who saved his life 8 years ago. Noah groaned. Oh, you two are so boring. I just wanted to have some fun. Anyway, I am going out. He opened the door and walked out of the private room. Is he angry? Isaac was a little anxious to see him walking out. Nah, he is going to look for beauties. Don't worry about him. Let's enjoy the drink. They picked up the glasses of wine and toasted. Isaac took a sip and asked, what about Sasha? Do you find her? Nicholas exhaled deeply and leaned back on the sofa. A glimmer of sadness obscured his eyes when Isaac mentioned her. She doesn't want to come back. She blames me for the accident. What? Isaac was shocked. How can she blame you? That accident was terrible. You could have lost your life. You were lucky that the deadly accident didn't kill you. Ha! A bitter smile crept on his lips, and he shook his head in dismay. How terrible she is, and you are still waiting for her. Isaac gazed at him dubiously. The accident damaged her uterus. She won't be able to conceive. You know how painful it is for a woman. I can feel her pain. All I need is to find her. I will tell her that I love her so much that I don't care if she can give me a child or not. I simply want her to be by my side. Isaac was stunned to hear the revelation. His heart also ached to see the pain in his eyes. He rubbed his shoulder to comfort him. Nicholas smiled a little and continued, "Well, I am happy for you. Finally, you find the woman you have searched for a long time. I also want to meet her. If it was not for her, I would have lost my best friend that day. I could never forgive myself if you had died when you came to visit me." Isaac smiled and said, "Yeah, I just wish I could gather myself to confess my feelings. You know I was shaking in front of her. She is damn beautiful." Nicholas smiled, but that smile didn't reach his eyes. He envied Isaac to see him so happy. When they were in college, Isaac used to remain quiet and sullen all the time. He never dated anyone because of his silent love for this unknown girl. On the contrary, Nicholas was lively and cheerful with his girlfriend Sasha. They were the most beautiful couple in the entire college. They were so happy together, but now the situation has changed. He was separated from Sasha and was in grief, whereas Isaac was delighted as he found his dream girl. Tring! 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 Meanwhile, Nicholas received a call from the villa. He frowned slightly and answered the call. "Hello, Master Sir is coming for dinner. He sounds angry on the phone." Mariam, the head servant of the villa, said in a state of anxiety, "I made a call to Miss Morris. She is on the way." "What?" Nicholas frowned deeply. Displeasure surfaced on his face. "Is she not there?" "She rarely stays here. Most of the time she stays in her apartment with her mother and brother." Nicholas grimaced and pinched his nose bridge. This woman was becoming a headache for him. "All right, I am coming." With that, he disconnected the call. He stood up to leave, but Isaac's words stopped him. "What happened? Where are you going?" "It's a family matter. I need to go to see Grandpa." He glanced at Isaac across his shoulder. "Then let me join you. I also want to see Grandpa." Isaac grinned and stood up as well. "Not tonight." Nicholas turned around and patted his shoulder. "I will invite you to dinner next time." He gave a smile to him. Isaac nodded and agreed with him. "Okay, good night." "Good night." After parting with Isaac, he drove directly to the villa. When he reached the villa after almost an hour, he saw his grandfather talking happily with the woman he married a month ago. He froze at the doorstep to see her smile. He didn't know that his so-called wife looked so beautiful. Her smile was alluring. Her eyes twinkled when she smiled. Nicholas had seen countless magnificent models and actresses. Zara was not considered as gorgeous and beautiful as them, but she looked innocent and pure. She was pretty in her own way. He never took a good look at her. This was the first time he was observing her so attentively. Her curved eyebrows were thin. Her thick, curved eyelashes were flapping from time to time when she blinked. Her red, thin lips were opening and closing continuously. But Nicholas was so engrossed admiring her that he couldn't hear her at all. "You still remember to come back." Solomon Grantham's cold voice snatched him out of his trance. He looked at him and approached him, smiling a little. "Sorry, Grandpa, you have to wait for me." He gave him a big hug. Solomon Grantham slapped on his back and scolded, "You brat! Why didn't you come to the mansion last night? Why did your pa lie to us?" "Grandpa." Nicholas sat on the sofa beside him and smiled. "I was truly busy last night. Benjamin didn't lie. Suddenly, a client set a meeting in a bar. I went there to meet him. I thought it would be over soon. But the meeting lasted longer than expected, and I got drunk too. Ask your granddaughter-in-law if you don't believe me." Nicholas looked at Zara with a faint smile on his face. Solomon also turned his head and gazed at her inquisitively. Zara's heart thumped loudly when she made eye contact with Nicholas. She immediately pulled back her eyes and looked at Solomon. "Yes, he was drunk last night." Solomon's anger towards Nicholas dissipated a little after hearing this. He was mad since last night, thinking that Nicholas lied to him. But it turned out that he was actually busy with a meeting. Grandpa, we should eat now. I will ask Miriam to serve dinner. Zara's words broke his trance. He nodded and said, "A light." Miriam served the food soon, and they all started eating quietly. Solomon didn't stay long after dinner. Zara thought Nicholas would also leave, but to her surprise, he went to the bedroom. Her heart was pounding inside her ribcage. What was he doing? Was he planning to spend the night at the villa? Last night's erotic scenes surfaced in her mind, causing her cheeks to burn when this question passed through her mind. She was hesitating whether to go to the room or not. She remained rooted in the dining hall, looking at the bedroom on the first floor. "Madam, I am going home." Zara came to her senses after hearing Miriam. She only nodded in response. She closed the door when Miriam left. After dithering for a while, she finally made her way to the room. She saw Nicholas in his pajamas sitting on the single settee beside the French window reading a book. Taking a deep breath, she walked to the closet, hanging down her head. Nicholas glanced at her slender figure and resumed reading his book, ignoring her completely. Zara quickly took her pajamas out of the closet and went to the bathroom. Her heart was still beating faster. She closed the door of the bathroom and leaned against it, placing her hand on her chest. She was inhaling and exhaling deeply as if she was trying to calm down. After a while, her heartbeat normalized and she took the shower quickly. Nicholas was still reading the book, sitting in the same position when she came out. She wanted to ask him something, but she couldn't summon her courage to speak and ended up staring at him stupidly. Nicholas sensed her piercing gaze and asked, without looking back at her, "Are you not done yet staring at me?" Zara's cheeks began to burn again. She was embarrassed. She looked down on her toes, biting her bottom lip. Nicholas closed the book and kept it on the small table beside the settee. "Miriam said you rarely stay here." He slowly raised his head and looked at her. "Have you forgotten the terms and conditions of the contract? According to the terms, you can't stay out of this villa without my permission. Do you forget that?" Zara's toes curled up, and she clasped her pajamas on both sides tightly. She was nervous. My brother is not well. His surgery is scheduled next week." Zara finally summoned her courage to speak. "Please allow me to stay there until he recovers." Nicholas's tense eyebrows eased up a little to hear her. Now only he remembered about her brother's illness, but his words were cruel and cold. "No, you can't. I don't want Grandpa to suspect us." Zara was stunned. She looked up at him instantly in disbelief. How could he stop her from staying with her mother and brother? "You can go to meet them, but you can't spend the night there. You have to return here. Am I clear to you?" His tone was not high, but it was authoritative and cold enough, forcing the other party to lose the courage to speak. Zara looked down again, pressing her lips tight. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked stubbornly not to shed them. "Anyway, I am going to stay here from tonight to avoid Grandpa's suspicions." Zara almost choked on her saliva after hearing him. He eventually decided to stay here in the villa. She clearly remembered him saying on their wedding day that he felt disgusting to see her face. What happened now? If he stayed here, he would encounter her again and again. Wouldn't he feel disgusting? She wondered. She slowly raised her head and gawked at him incredulously. Nicholas sighed in dismay. To see her spacing out. "Why are you staring at me now?" Zara came to her senses and shook his head frantically. "No, I mean... She looked here and there other than his eyes and searched for the proper words to say. Nicholas creased his eyebrows and observed her. "Is this woman crazy? Why is she behaving so weird?" He sized her up attentively. "The room. I will go to the guest room." She rushed to the closet soon after dropping those words. Nicholas wanted to stop her. But in the end, he didn't say anything. He stood up and walked out to the study. Zara didn't have many things in the villa, so it didn't take much time for her to shift to the guest room. She locked the room and laid on the bed, placing her hand on her chest. Her eyes fixed on the ceiling. She still could feel her heartbeat in her mouth. She became so anxious and nervous standing a few minutes in front of him. She wondered how she could stay calm with him under the same roof. This thought only increased her palpitation. She pulled the quilt up and hid under it, trying to get some sleep. Zara was trying to get some sleep. However, when she thought that Nicholas was just a few yards away from her, she couldn't even close her eyes. She kept on tossing and turning. After a long time also, when she couldn't fall asleep, she got up from the bed and went out to the balcony. A mild breeze hit her body the moment she stepped out, and it was sending a soothing sensation to her excited nerves. She felt relaxed and inhaled profoundly. However, the smell of tobacco hit her nostrils. She frowned slightly and sniffed, looking here and there as if she was searching for the source of the smell. Just when she turned her head to the left side, she saw Nicholas smoking a cigarette on the balcony attached to the master bedroom. They were separated by only one room. She gawked at him in astonishment, her expression perplexed. Nicholas turned his head simultaneously and saw her, their eyes locked instantly. Zara skipped a bit the moment she made eye contact with him. She blinked twice and kept staring at him dumbly, mouth agape. A few moments later, she regained her senses and ran inside the room. She locked the glass door to the balcony and leaned against it, placing her hand on her chest, closing her eyes. Her chest was moving up and down vigorously, as her breathing was fast. She was restless, so she went outside to calm down. But who would have thought that she would encounter him? Now she was even more anxious than before. She was doomed to stay awake for the rest of the night. Nicholas, on the other end, frowned deeply when he saw her running inside frantically. He had never seen such a weird woman in his life. Most women were drawn to his charm and wanted to get closer to him. She was the first woman who ran away after seeing him. She even didn't want to stay in the same room with him. Is she abnormal? He wondered how she was not affected by his charisma. He extinguished the cigarette and looked in the direction of the guest room with complex feelings in his heart. At this point, he did not know exactly what he was feeling, but he didn't like the way she ran inside. How dare she ignore him? This thought made him angry, and his expression darkened. Who gave her the right to disregard him? Only he had the right in this marriage if he would give her face or not. She was only his contract bride, a puppet of his. He needed to have a good talk with her. His fists tightened on his sides in anticipation. Zara didn't sleep at all that night. She woke up at the dawn break and quickly freshened up. It was the first morning after her marriage that she had a chance to have breakfast with him. Although she was palpitating thinking that she would meet him again, she did not want to make any mistakes or act foolishly in front of him. Not only that, but she needed his permission to go to the banquet this weekend. When she agreed with Isaac, she did not worry about Nicholas because he and she did not stay together in the villa. She could go anywhere with no restrictions. However, the situation has changed now. She couldn't do anything willfully without his permission. After thinking this, she decided to make breakfast for him. She made toasts and scrambled eggs and brewed coffee as well. By the time she finished making breakfast, Nicholas came down wearing his black suits with a briefcase in his hand. Zara ran towards him. Good morning. She tried to put a smile on her face and said, "Breakfast is ready. Please have that before you leave." He looked at her for a while before answering. "I have a meeting in an hour." He left, soon after saying these words. Zara's excitement vanished when she saw him going out without having breakfast. She cooked for him with fervor and wished him to eat. She even looked forward to him saying something about her culinary skills subconsciously. In the end, it turned out that it was only her willful wish that would never come true. Why did she forget that he had no feelings for her. She didn't want to cry, but the tears still accumulated inside her eyes. She sniffed and looked around, blinking continuously. A bitter smile crept on her face. Then she came to the kitchen, filled a plate with the toast and scrambled eggs, and poured a cup of coffee. After taking a few bites on the toast, she was no longer able to eat. Tears that threatened to fall finally found their way to escape, but she wiped off the tears ruthlessly and forcefully ate whatever she took for herself. After changing into a black skirt and a white shirt, she went to work. Half an hour later, she reached the office and went to her desk. Just as she took out her diary to check Isaac's schedule, someone knocked on her desk. She looked up and saw Isaac standing beside her with a frown on his face. She got up from the chair and smiled. "Good morning, Mr. White. I was about to walk into your office. I have waited for you in front of your apartment. I don't see you coming out." "When did you come here?" Isaac didn't wait for her to finish speaking. He waited for her outside the apartment for 1 hour, hoping that he would surprise her, but she never came out. He wanted to wait a bit longer. However, he got a call from Jaden Cooper, so he had to leave reluctantly. But unexpectedly, he found her at her desk. He wondered how she reached the office before him. His words stunned Zara. Her smile also disappeared gradually. For a few moments, she couldn't understand what to say. After contemplating for a while, she said, don't go to the apartment to wait for me. I'll be embarrassed if I get caught with you. You know what I mean." She looked at him with an imploring look. Isaac opened his mouth to say something, but in the end, he couldn't say it out loud and clear, and ended up staring at her with complex feelings in his heart. He wanted to ask her to be his girlfriend. He wanted to express his feelings to her. However, he was unable to muster his courage. Maybe he needed some more time to get close to her. "All right. I won't wait for you outside your apartment. But will you allow me to drive back home?" His fingers were crossed inside the pockets. Zara hesitated for some time, after thinking that it would save a few minutes if she took the ride and could spend a little longer with her mother and brother. She agreed with him. "Okay." Zara offered a smile to him and earned a grin from him. "All right. Our company is in the process of signing a new contract. Go bring the file from Mr. Cooper and come to my office." Okay, Mr. White." She turned to leave, but before that Isaac again spoke. "I told you to call me Isaac." Zara chuckled and looked down, biting her bottom lip. She nodded and looked up at him. "All right, Isaac." Isaac smiled and gazed at her lips. He resisted the impulse to kiss her. His fingers were itching to caress her cheek. However, he couldn't dare to do that. His hands in his pocket curled up into fists. He turned around and marched to his office without a word. Zara went to Jaden Cooper's office to fetch the file on the way. She encountered Jude. "Oh, my lucky girl, finally I found you." Jude grinned widely. "How is our CEO? Is he tough to deal with? How are you doing with him?" Zara smiled and replied shortly, "He is good." Jude sighed dramatically. "I really envy you. You are lucky enough to work closely with him." Her smile resumed, and she added, "But I am happy for you. You finally got promoted." "Thank you." Zara smiled and looked down. Meanwhile, she remembered something and asked frantically, "Can you go shopping with me?" "Yeah. Why not?" Jude exclaimed excitedly. "I just love shopping. I was planning to go shopping this weekend. A sale is going on at the downtown mall. We can go there." Zara shook her head and said, "No, I want to buy a dress." She cleared her throat before saying, "Mr. White asked me to accompany him to a banquet. I do not have a dress suitable for these occasions." "Oh, I see." Jude's expression turned pensive. She thought for a while and smiled widely. "I know a place where you can buy dresses for such parties. It would be a bit costly, though. But there are other dresses, too, that we can afford. We can go and have a look." "All right. See you later." I got to go now. After parting with Jude, she went to Jaden Cooper's office and brought the file of the new project. She headed to the CEO's office. Isaac checked the file thoroughly and said, I have already talked to President Grantham about this project. Go sign this contract. Zara's scalp went numb to hear the name, President Grantham. In Bay City, there was only one man called President Grantham, and he was none other than her husband Nicholas Grantham. Every time she heard that name, she began to palpitate, and that moment was not exceptional either. She wanted to minimize the chances to encounter him. It was better for him, as well as her, she thought. When Isaac noticed her troubled look, he frowned and couldn't restrain himself from asking, "Is everything all right?" His words broke her trance, and she looked at him hesitantly. She licked her lips and asked warily, Can you send someone else? I kind of feel that I will make a mistake, and he will refuse to sign the contract." Isaac frowned even more deeply and asked, "Do you know him?" "No." She shook her head in a frenzy. "I mean, yes, who doesn't know him in Bay City? I heard that he is pretty strict, cold, aloof." "All right, I understand." Isaac laughed softly and interrupted her. "Don't worry, he won't eat you. And if he bullies you, just call me. I will make him regret it." Zara was flabbergasted. She even forgot to close her mouth and kept staring at him dumbly, contemplating the situation. If she again refused to go to the Apex groups, Isaac would be wary and begin to ask questions. She might find it harder to answer him. It was better to agree with him and go to sign the contract. After thinking in that way, she nodded and said briefly, "Okay." Isaac smiled and passed the file to her. "Good. Come back soon. We will have lunch together." She mustered a smile and nodded. After taking the file, she walked out. More than half an hour later, she reached the head office of Apex Groups. This was the first time she came here and stared at the skyscraper. The Grandeur building was telling how huge the company was, and the man she married was the president of this company. She would feel proud and flaunt herself in front of everyone as president's wife if their relationship was like the normal husband and wife. But unfortunately, their marriage was just a 2-year contract, and she could not disclose that she was married to him. Speaking of him, she regained her senses and remembered why she came here. The thought of meeting him was sufficient for her to palpitate. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the heavy glass door and made her way to the reception. "Hello, I came from Clifax to sign the contract." "I need to see President Grantham," she smiled at the receptionist. The receptionist also smiled at her and said, "Please go to the top floor. The president's secretary will be there, and she'll schedule your appointment with him." "Thank you." Zara turned and walked to the elevator. She pressed the button to the 50th floor, and the door of the elevator closed gradually. A few minutes later, the elevator halted on the 50th floor. The temperature of the entire floor was pretty low, and she felt cold the moment she came out of the elevator. The walls of the top floor were made up of one-way glasses. The whole city of Bay could be viewed from the top floor. It was a magnificent view. Zara couldn't prevent her feet from getting close to the wall and looking down. A smile gradually crept on her face. "Mrs. Grantham, you are here." Zara almost jumped up when someone addressed her as Mrs. Grantham. She turned frantically and saw the man who drove Nicholas to the villa that night when he got drunk. She wondered who this man was and how he knew her identity. Benjamin figured out what exactly she was thinking just by looking at her shocked expression. He smiled and said, "Sorry I didn't introduce that night. Myself, Benjamin, President Grantham's pa." Benjamin stretched his hand to her. Oh, it turned out that he was Nicholas's assistant. Zara heaved a small sigh. She mustered a smile and shook hands with him. "Hello, Benjamin." He retracted his hand and asked, "Do you have something to say to Mr. Grantham?" Zara smiled awkwardly. "I am here as a representative of Clifax to sign the contract." Oh, I see. It was only then that Benjamin remembered that Nicholas's best friend, Isaac White, had recently come to Bay to expand his family business. They were talking about collaborating, but he didn't know that Zara worked in the Clifax. He nodded and said, "Mr. Grantham is in a meeting. You can wait in his office. He will be there shortly." After thanking Benjamin, Zara made her way to the president's office. With a click, she opened the heavy wooden door and went inside. The office was enormous, painted in gray. Her eyes landed on his black leather seat behind the large mahogany table as soon as she entered the office. She felt as if his seat also radiated the cold aura just like him. In that huge office room, there was not a single decorative item. It looked so dull. She sighed and sat on the huge couch. Just as she sat down, the next door to the desk opened with a click and a gorgeous woman came out. "Honey, you came back. I have waited so long for you." Zara was shocked to see the woman and stood up frantically. She stared at the woman with wide eyes, mouth ajar. She recognized her. This woman was the famous actress Sophie Stone. Nicholas had been seen with her on many occasions. She was the woman Nicholas was hanging out with recently. Zara felt like her entire body jammed on the spot. Sophie also froze to see her. She thought Nicholas had returned from the meeting when she heard the click of the open door. But she wasn't expecting an unwanted guest. Her expression got ugly and she grudgingly asked, "Who are you?" On the other end, the meeting was over, and Nicholas came out of the conference hall. Benjamin approached him and said, "Mrs. Grantham has come to see you." "Who?" Nicholas frowned deeply and cast an unpleasant look at him. Benjamin felt his hair stand up on his back to face his icy glare. He cleared his throat and corrected his statement. "I mean, Miss Morris is here." "Why is she here?" Nicholas gritted his teeth and squeezed out those words. This woman was truly a headache, he thought. He regretted not forbidding her to enter the office. Benjamin explained quickly. "She came to sign the contract from Clifax." Nicholas frowned even more deeply. He gazed at Benjamin incredulously. He ignored this woman so much that he never tried to find out where she was working. He rubbed his forehead and asked, "Where is she?" "She is waiting in your office." Benjamin cracked a smile. Nicholas was on the verge of losing his temper. He cast a murderous glare at him. Benjamin's smile vanished straight away. It was only then that he remembered about Sophie Stone waiting in the office. What a blunder had he done? He sent his boss's wife where his other woman was waiting for him. It wouldn't be surprising if he got fired today. Nicholas wanted to hit him hard, but right now he needed to go to his office as soon as possible. He didn't know why he felt discomfort when he thought about Zara encountering one of the women he dated. He walked up to the office with long strides. Inside the office, it took a couple of seconds for Zara to come to her senses. Her frozen fingers trembled a little. She was so anxious that she stuttered. I came to sign a contract. Sorry to disturb you. I will come later." She picked up the file from the couch that she dropped earlier and walked out in haste. However, just when she reached out to hold the doorknob, the door was pushed open from outside and the familiar tall figure came into her line of sight. She took a few steps back involuntarily and gawked at him blankly. He also looked at her with displeasure written on his face. Zara thought he was mad at her. She opened her mouth to apologize, but before she could utter a word, Sophie threw herself on Nicholas and coiled her arms around his neck. "Darling, I missed you. Why did you take so long?" She pouted and looked at him coquettishly. Benjamin, who followed Nicholas, felt awkward to see the scene in front of him. He quickly turned and left, closing the door behind him. Zara immediately lowered her head and looked down at the ground. Pursing her lips tight, her entire self was shuddering in nervousness. Her grip on the file tightened a bit. Nicholas glanced at Zara and peeled Sophie's hands from his neck. You came without informing me. I have work to do. Now you have to bear it. Go inside and wait for me. I have some more things to do. Sophie was a little unhappy by his statement. She waited for him for almost 1 hour. But when he finally came back after the meeting, he still didn't give her time. It was all because of this woman. Sophie looked at Zara contemptuously. If it was not for her, Nicholas would have spent time with her. This thought annoyed her, and her face turned gloomy. She wanted to throw her out of the office. However, in front of Nicholas, she couldn't act recklessly. She smiled and grabbed his arm. But you know I went abroad for shooting this morning, only I landed here. I missed you so much that I came directly here from the airport. Don't you miss me? She eyed him provocatively, biting her bottom lip. Nicholas smiled and caressed her cheek. Be good and wait a while. We will go to lunch when I finish. Zara's ears were burning. She thought if she could disappear from here. It was becoming more and more unbearable for her to stand here and listen to their love talk. She mustered her courage to speak. I am sorry, President Grantham. I am not supposed to be here without your permission. I will go out. Call me when you are free. She didn't lift her head while she spoke. She lifted her leg and walked out. However, her steps froze on the track when she heard his cold voice. Wait! Did I ask you to go out? Zara felt a chill on her back. Just now, he was talking in such a gentle tone with Sophie that it sounded like a mellow tune. But his gentleness was not for her. He could only talk to her coldly. Zara's heart trembled to think this. How could she expect tenderness from him? Even if she was his wife, she didn't have any space in his heart. She clasped the file tightly to suppress the pain in her heart. Sophie only gritted her teeth to hear this. It was good that this woman wanted to leave on her own. But why didn't Nicholas allow her to leave? She wondered. She couldn't help but say, Nicholas, baby, tell her to come later. Let's go for lunch. I am starving. Don't be like this. His tone was no longer cold while talking to Sophie. I need to deal with an important business. Wait for me. It won't take long. All right. At last Sophie reluctantly agreed, but she demanded something that took away the last bit of color on Zara's face. I will listen to you. But kiss me first. Zara instantly lifted her head and looked at them. She even forgot how to breathe. Was he going to kiss Sophie in front of her? Zara felt twinged in her heart and stared at Nicholas incredulously. Nicholas lowered his head and kissed Sophie passionately. But his eyes were on Zara, observing her every reaction. Zara was totally amazed to see Nicholas kissing Sophia before her. Although she knew he had no feelings for her, she at least didn't expect him to do something like this with his other woman in the presence of her. After all, she was still his lawful wife. How much he despised her. She turned around frantically, unable to see anymore. Her grip on the file was tight, but she couldn't stop her hands from shaking. Her breathing became quicker and quicker. Tears started accumulating inside her eyes. She still could hear the kissing. Her stomach churned and she covered her mouth. She turned and ran out. But before she could open the door, Nicholas snapped, "Halt!" Zara's steps halted abruptly. She stood still without turning back. His cold voice rang again. Who gave you the permission to go out? There was a pause. For a while, Zara's heartbeat leaped. Her hand was an inch away from the doorknob. She still didn't retract her hand. At that moment, the least she wanted was to stay in that office. For a moment, she thought about ignoring him and running off. However, she came to sign a contract. If she fled, he might not be willing to sign the contract. Moreover, he might get angry. What if he acted against Clifax? Who didn't know how powerful the Granthams were in the entire Bay City? Clifax couldn't afford to offend Nicholas. Thinking in this way, she retracted her hand, but her heart was bleeding. The tears, which threatened to fall, eventually found their way out. She wiped off the tears sneakily. In the meantime, she heard him say again, "Turn back." Taking a deep breath, she turned back. However, she didn't lift her head and kept looking down at the tip of her shoes. Her hands were still tightly clasped on the file. Nicholas observed her attentively. Her flustered face, her rapidly undulating chest, and her trembling eyelashes were not gone unnoticed by him. So, my action affected her. Amusement spread in his eyes, and the corner of his lips curled up slyly. He looked at Sophie and said, "Go and wait for me." Sophie didn't refuse him this time. She nodded and walked into the room next to his desk. Zara was still rooted to the spot, hanging her head down. "Bring the file." Nicholas turned and walked to his seat. Zara followed him slowly and kept the file on the table. Nicholas sat down in his chair and took the file. Then he began to check the file. Zara didn't raise her head at all. She was still standing beside the work table. Although Nicholas was checking the file, his focus was on Zara. He glanced at her and asked, "Why are you still standing?" "Sit down. I am fine." At last, Zara found her voice and said those 3 words feebly. Nicholas lifted his head and shot a stern glare at her. "I said sit down." His tone was not high, but it was cold and commanding. Zara quivered a little and sat on the chair opposite him obediently. Nicholas looked at her coldly for a while before concentrating on the file. After checking the file thoroughly, he signed on it. He handed her the file and asked, "I didn't know you worked for Clifax. What is your designation?" Zara took the file and replied, "I am CEO's secretary." "Is that so?" Nicholas's eyes narrowed. Incredulity spread on his face. "You mean that you are Isaac's secretary?" "Yes." "Interesting," he murmured in his mind and watched her carefully. Zara got up and said professionally, "Thank you for giving your valuable time. President Grantham Clifax will work hard for this project." She flashed a smile at him and tried to act confident. But her legs were shaking. Nicholas didn't say a word. He only looked at her, leaning back on the chair, and nodded curtly, his expression unreadable. Zara turned around and walked out. The smile on her face disappeared right away the moment she turned around. Her face was as white as a blank paper. She had no idea how she came out of the office building. When the glaring sunlight hit her eyes, only then did she come to her senses. She took the goggles out of her bag and wore them. She took a cab and went back to the company. When she reached the company, she went directly to Isaac's office and submitted the file. Isaac was happy with her. "I am glad that you went and signed the contract. Let's go and have lunch." Isaac got up from the chair. "No. Isaac, listen to me." Isaac's smile froze in the corner of his lips and stared at her, pulling his eyebrows together. He was a bit confused. He waited for her to speak. Zara looked down and licked her lips. Her mood was not good. She just wanted to stay alone for a while. However, she didn't know how to deny him. After contemplating something, she raised her head and looked at him. "It's that. I fear that the staff will get a wrong impression if we go together. I have become your secretary recently. If colleagues see us going to lunch together, they will begin to speculate about us. I don't want to hear any gossip about you and me. I know you want to treat me well, but we should be careful. I will always treat you as a friend outside the office. But here in the office, I want to maintain a professional relationship. I hope you know what I mean." Isaac stared at her with complicated feelings in his heart. He seemed to have lost his voice. "I can always treat my secretary at dinner." He wanted to say this, but after noticing her unwillingness, he didn't say that. He had to work hard to gain her trust and love, he thought. He was disappointed, but thinking that she still considered him a friend, the uneasiness in his heart dissipated somewhat. He had to slow down to win her heart. After contemplating this, he smiled and said, "All right, I will keep this in mind. Now cheer up. I don't like seeing my secretary upset." Zara couldn't help but smile to hear him. Her mood wasn't as bitter as earlier. "Now go to lunch. Don't skip your meal thinking that I am not taking you out. She giggled and responded, I understand, Mr. CEO. She purposely emphasized the words, Mr. CEO. A playful smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. He found Zara more and more charming. His determination to make her his woman was getting stronger and stronger. Zara left and went to the cafeteria. There she found Jude and had lunch with her. The pain in her heart was gone after spending time with Jude. She was now no more bothered about Nicholas. After lunch, she came back to her desk and concentrated on her work. At the end of the day, Jude took her to a boutique. This was one of the expensive boutiques in Bay City. The latest collections of famous designers were available here. Zara felt a little out of space. She asked Jude in a low voice, Why did you bring me here? All the gowns look pretty expensive. I can't afford it. Don't worry. This is the best store I know where you can find dresses for classy parties. Yes, I agree with you that the dresses are a bit costly, but you will find some dresses that you can afford. Come on, take a look around. Jude held her hand and walked inside the boutique further. Zara could do nothing but follow her quietly, looking at the dresses carefully. If truth to be told, she found all the dresses quite pretty and attractive. If it wasn't for her budget, she'd be interested in buying a couple of dresses. A pink off-shoulder flared gown with heavy embroidery work caught her attention. She stopped her footsteps to look closely at the dress. Jude also stopped walking when she felt a tug. She followed her gaze and saw the gown. A wide grin crept on her face. Wow, this is amazing. I am pretty sure it is damn costly. Yes, you are right. There are only a few pieces of that dress, and it is the only one in our shop. Zara's hand, which was about to touch the dress, froze within inches of the dress when she heard the female staff's voice. She retracted her hand and looked at the source of the voice, only to see a blonde woman in a black knee-length skirt and a white blouse. She might be considered a pretty lady with her delicate makeup. However, she seemed quite arrogant. She sized Zara up and said in her swaggering tone, This dress is designed by the best designer of Bay City. All the pieces are sold out. Only this one is left. Zara smiled awfully and looked at Jude. She was about to say to go to the other side, which is when she heard a crisp female voice, Don't let touch the dress to a random customer. Who knows if she can afford it? What if she spoils it? Zara turned her head and saw Sophie approaching them with a stormy momentum. She saw Nicholas as well following her quietly, his expression unreadable. Zara's breathing hitched up to see him. She hadn't expected to meet him here. Her eyes were glued on him. However, he didn't even glance at her. Sophie's next words snatched her back to reality. Some people just come to look around. They never can afford such a dress. You should be aware of this. She shot a stern glare at the staff. Then she turned her head and looked at Zara contemptuously. It looks like the standard of your shop declines, which is why anyone can dare to come here. Sophie was mad at Zara for creating a disturbance in the office. She never thought she'd see her again. But now that she appeared in front of her, she wanted to unleash her wrath upon her. She didn't hesitate to humiliate her. Excuse me, who the hell you think you are? Do you think we can't afford to buy this dress? The heroine is currently facing a difficult situation and needs your support. Please leave your words of encouragement for her in the comments section. Jude was furious with Sophie's words. She couldn't take the humiliation. She came forward and snapped, Who the hell do you think you are? Just because you are an actress, you can humiliate others. Do you think we can't afford to buy it? Sophie laughed and mocked. Or else, she observed Jude and Zara up and down carefully. Do you think you are capable to stand in a shop like this? Why don't you go to the store where sales are going on? That place is perfect for you. Zara's face was pale as she saw Nicholas's cold, dark face. He didn't say anything and let Sophie disgrace them. If he wanted to, he could have stopped Sophie or took her away to the other side. But he stood beside Sophie and watched everything quietly. Zara's heart trembled to see this. She thought he was angry to see her here. She grabbed Jude's wrist and pulled her back. "Let's go. I don't want anything." Jude was about to curse Sophie when Zara pulled her back. She was even more enraged. "What do you mean?" "We must buy that dress. I can't let anyone belittle us that way." Zara didn't listen to her. She pulled her away with her. Sophie, on the other end, had a sneer on her face. She was satisfied to see the defeated look of Zara. She didn't care about the other woman's blabbering. She said in a mocking tone, "Go, get out of here. This place is not for people like you." Jude turned her head to look back at Sophie and glared at her scornfully. She wanted to break free of Zara's grip and snap Sophie. But after noticing Zara's behavior, she realized something and changed her mood. She leaned on her and said in a low voice, "Listen, I can lend you some money. You must buy the dress. How can you let her humiliate us? Let's show her what we are capable of." Zara lost her composure completely. She released her hand and said, "Okay, go ahead. If you want to stay, stay. I am going out." She turned around and left. Jude was dumbstruck and angry at the same time. Clenching her fists, she followed her. "Wait, Zara." Zara was walking with long strides, but Jude was faster than her. She reached out to hold her wrist and turned her around. "Why did you come out? I told you we could get the dress. I am even ready to lend you money. Why didn't you listen to me?" Zara's frustration elevated to hear her harsh tone. She pulled her hand back and snapped, "Even if we can afford that dress, we can't buy it. Don't you see that man next to her? He is Nicholas Grantham. Do you think he let us buy that dress when his girlfriend already sets her eyes on it? Didn't you see how hatefully he was looking at us?" Jude was stunned. She trembled slightly to hear the name, Nicholas Grantham. Her face also turned pale. Though she found him a little familiar, she was so busy with Sophie that she did not see him properly. When she heard Zara, only then did she remember Nicholas dating Sophie recently. It was obvious that he wouldn't let anyone win over his girlfriend. Jude felt lucky thinking that he let go of them easily. Now she realized why Zara came out in such a hurry. "Oh my God, I totally forgot that Sophie is now Mr. Grantham's girlfriend." She covered her mouth soon after finishing speaking. Horror spread in her eyes. She clasped Zara's hands and said, "Thank you for getting me out. Otherwise, Mr. Grantham would probably throw us in jail for offending Sophie. Let's get out of here before he comes out and sees us." She walked away, holding Zara's hand. Inside the boutique, Nicholas kept looking in the direction from where Zara went out. His expression was unsightly. He had a dull ache in his heart to see her going out. He didn't know what he was exactly feeling at that moment. That feeling was suffocating. So far, no woman could affect him. She was the first after Sasha who created ripples in his heart. He didn't like this feeling. He could not let any woman dominate over him other than Sasha. "Darling, I want this dress. Will you buy it for me?" Sophie's words pulled him out of his thoughts. He looked at her unpleasantly. He turned around and stormed out without saying a word. Sophie's jaw dropped in shock. For a few seconds, she didn't do anything other than staring at his departing figure. When he was out of her line of sight, it was only when she came to her senses and chased him after. However, she was late. He already got into the car and drove off. Sophie stood there, watching the fast-moving car, stunned. Zara was checking out a few files that she brought to summarize, sitting on the sofa in the guest room. Meanwhile, Nicholas barged into the room. The loud bang startled Zara. She flinched and got up instantaneously. She was stunned to see Nicholas standing tall inside the room, emitting the cold aura. Before she could comprehend anything properly, he extended his hand to her, and a paper-carrying bag came before her eyes. Zara was totally baffled. She looked at the carrying bag with her wide eyes. The carrying bag was so close to her face that she was unable to see the words on the bag. She tried to read the store name written on the bag, squinting her eyes. Nicholas got a bit impatient. He stuffed the bag in her hands. Out of curiosity, Zara peeped inside the bag. Her eyeballs almost popped out to see the pink dress that she saw in that boutique. Her hands that holding the bag trembled slightly. She couldn't believe in her eyes that he bought this dress for her. She raised her head and looked up at him incredulously. She wanted to ask something, but before she could speak, he put a black credit card in her hands. She looked down at the card in astonishment. What was he up to? She slowly lifted her head and gawked at him. Utterly stupefied, Nicholas rolled his eyes to see her dumb expression. Eventually, he opened his mouth. Use this card if you need to buy something. Don't embarrass me again in the future. He turned to leave soon after finishing speaking. However, his steps paused on the track to hear her words. I don't need this. What? Did she refuse him just now? How dare she? His expression turned ugly by this thought. He turned back and looked at her, creasing his eyebrows tight. In this marriage, only he had the right to say yes or no. She couldn't deny him. Anger began to build up in his stomach when he thought of it. I don't need your card. I can buy my things, and this dress is too expensive for me. I can't take it. You should give it to your girlfriend. She passed the paper bag and the card to him. He looked down at the things in her hands momentarily, and then moved his eyes to her, his expression dark. He slowly approached her and asked her, in a chilly tone, who gave you the right to say no to me? Remember, you can't turn me down. Zara got scared to see his enraged eyes. She took a few steps back subconsciously. He didn't stop his steps from approaching her and continued to speak in the same tone. If you don't have enough money to buy the dress, why did you go to that shop? Do you like being insulted? Or are you intent on embarrassing me? His words stunned Zara. How was he supposed to be embarrassed? She wondered. No one other than the family knew about their marriage. Even if she was humiliated in the public, his name would not be dragged down. There was no question of his embarrassment. Furthermore, he hated her. He should feel happy to see her humiliated, right? Then why was he upset? His next words broke the trail of her thoughts. And what do you mean by giving the gown to Sophie? Do you think she'd be interested in the dress that you touched? Zara shook her head and tried to explain. I didn't touch. Before she could finish speaking, her legs hit on the bed. And she lost her balance. The paper bag and credit card slipped out of her hand and dropped to the ground. She grabbed his tie unconsciously and fell to the bed, pulling him down. Nicholas's eyes went wide before he could balance himself. He also fell on her. His robust body pressed her thin, petite body. His hands were on the sides of her head while her hands were pressed against his chest. Their faces were only a few inches away. His hot breathing was fanning on her cheeks. She stared at him with wide eyes dumbly, her heartbeat elevated. She could smell his cologne. At that moment, she remembered the crazy night she spent with him when he came drunk. Butterflies started flapping inside her stomach the moment she recalled the night. Her cheeks were burning. She felt as if her entire body was on fire. Nicholas also eyed her blankly. His gaze roved on her face. Her black eyes were as deep as an ocean, filled with stars. For a few moments he lost in her magnetic eyes. Then his gaze slowly drifted down to her pink lips. Those lips were even more alluring. How would it feel to kiss that lips? Suddenly, he wanted to taste her lips. Before he could kiss her, she pushed him down and got out of the bed. She retreated her steps and apologized. I am sorry. I am sorry. I am sorry. She squatted and picked up the dress and the credit card. It will not happen again. I sincerely apologize. Nicholas sat up lazily on the bed and observed her carefully. He was amused to see her blushed cheeks and trembling hands. The anger within him also started to subside. However, he was a little disappointed for not being able to taste her lips. He got up off the bed and looked at her. especially on her lips. Zara felt oppressed under his imposing aura. She turned and walked to the closet. Nicholas looked at her back for a while, and a meaningful smirk appeared in the corner of his lips. No one knew what he was thinking at that moment. He turned around and walked out. Zara heaved a long sigh when she saw him go out. She ran towards the door and locked it from the inside. Zara found it difficult to concentrate on the work further. She winded up and went to the bed. She still wondered why he bought the dress for her. She thought Sophie would buy this gown. But how did Nicholas manage to bring that dress for her? This question increased her agitation, and she couldn't fall asleep. She thought of going out to the balcony, but thinking he could smoke on the balcony adjoining the bedroom, she did not go out. She lay on the bed again, closing her eyes. After tossing and turning a few times, she eventually fell asleep. She didn't know what the time was and how long she had been asleep when she felt a dip in the bed next to her. She was so sleepy that she couldn't open her eyes. She snuggled into the pillow and kept sleeping. In the meantime, she felt a warm, strong arm around her waist. Her eyes snapped open and turned her head to look back. In the dim light, she could see Nicholas's handsome face an inch away from her. She got scared. A scream escaped from her mouth. She was about to jump out of the bed, but his grip around her waist tightened. He pulled her closer to him. "Don't move." His tone was low but full of authority. Zara stopped moving and stared at him with her wide eyes, utterly bewildered. Her heartbeat leaped up. Her body was as rigid as a stick. Nicholas's body heated up to see her so close in his arms. His eyes were glued to her lips. He wanted to devour that lips, but at the same time he didn't want to force her. He wanted her to surrender herself to him. Zara, on the other end, was wondering how he came into the room. She remembered she had shut the door from the inside. She was yet to recover from the shock when she felt his fingers trailing on her sides gently. Shivers ran across her body. She could feel her hair standing from head to toe. Before she could figure out what he was doing, he leaned on her and whispered in her ear, "Tell me honestly, you were upset to see me kissing Sophie, weren't you?" He rubbed his sharp nose gently on her cheek. Zara's entire body trembled at his teasing. Her eyes went close automatically. A soft moan escaped from her mouth. He didn't stop trailing his finger on her waist. He kissed her neck and whispered again. "Answer me." "Yes," she whispered back. His touch, his warm breathing was sending a tingling sensation throughout her body. Heat rose within her. Slowly, her rigid body went soft. He brushed his lips on her lips and said, "Kiss me." His breath smelled like fresh mint. Zara felt as if she was intoxicated. She couldn't restrain herself from kissing. However, her kiss was clumsy as she never kissed anyone. The night she slept with him, she didn't kiss him. He was the one who had kissed her. Nicholas smiled at her clumsy kiss. In between the kiss, he said, "Let me teach you how to kiss." He took the lead and kissed her passionately. That kiss was so sensual that she felt several knots in her stomach. He slid his tongue inside her mouth and explored every inch of her mouth. His hands were roaming on her body. After a long, passionate kiss, he released her and said hoarsely, "Let me tell you something. If you obey me and please me, I will stop going to see those women." His words stunned Zara. She froze and stared at him in disbelief. Was he serious? At that moment, she recalled her mother's words. Her mother once told her that Nicholas would stop hooking up with different women once he got married, and that he would be loyal to his wife. Zara's heart started beating even faster in anticipation. Hope arose in her mind, thinking that she could win his heart one day. Perhaps he would fall in love with her, and consider spending his life with her. Although this thought surfaced in her mind, she still had a little doubt. She asked in a trance, "Are you telling the truth?" He caressed her cheek and replied, "Yes, dear. I promise I will not sleep with any woman during this term." Zara felt a little disappointed to hear him. He didn't forget to mention the time limit of their marriage, but she was hopeful. She would try hard to win his heart. Ugh. Before she could come out of her trance, he devoured her lips hungrily. Within a couple of minutes, their clothes were on the floor, and the room was filled with ambiguous voices of man and woman. That was another crazy night for them. Nicholas couldn't stop loving her. Zara was lost in ecstasy over and over again. The next day, she woke up with the sound of the alarm. She reached out to put off the alarm and stretched her hand to the other side of the bed to find Nicholas. But other than coldness, she didn't feel anything. She opened her eyes and sat up on the bed to look around. He was not in the room. She was sort of disappointed, but her face turned red, and the corner of her lips curled up, recalling what he said last night. Click! The bathroom door opened with a click, and Nicholas came out with a towel on his waist. Zara was startled and turned her head frantically to look at him. His upper naked body came into her sight. His chest was broad and muscular. This was the first time she was seeing him shirtless in broad daylight. Zara's eyes rested on the butterfly tattoo on his left side chest. It was neither small nor large. That was right where the heart was. She heard somewhere that the butterfly tattoo symbolizes love. However, the butterfly tattoo was popular amongst young women. She wondered why he tattooed butterfly. "Are you trying to seduce me?" His words broke her trance and looked up at his face, only to see him looking at her lasciviously. He had a seductive smile on his face. It was only when she realized that she was naked, she gasped and pulled up the quilt to cover herself. Her face immediately turned crimson red. He chuckled and approached her. What is there to hide?" He sat beside her and pulled her closer to him, wrapping his arm around her waist. Zara's heartbeat skyrocketed by his proximity. She clasped the quilt tightly to her chest and stared at him timidly. He leaned on her and whispered in her ear, "I have seen every inch of your body." He bit her earlobe as soon as he finished speaking. Zara's face turned redder. She couldn't make eye contact with him and looked down, biting her bottom lip. The memory of last night came alive in her mind, which made her breath unstable. He whispered again, "Go freshen up. If you stay here like this, I won't hesitate to take you once more. Then don't blame me if your boss scolds you for being late at the office." Zara didn't delay a second to get out of the bed and run to the washroom. Nicholas couldn't help but smile to see her action. He got up and went to his bedroom. When Zara came out of the room after freshening up, she saw Nicholas having breakfast in the dining hall. A smile gradually crept on her face, and she walked up to him. He saw her coming and said, "Come, have breakfast." Zara was overjoyed. She dreamed of a normal relationship with her husband, where they could eat together, chat happily, and live peacefully. When she saw Nicholas talking to her politely and asking her to join him at breakfast, she thought her wish would come true. She could have a peaceful life with him. She smiled and sat opposite him. He picked some pancakes for her and added honey to them. She ate the pancakes quietly. This small act of him warmed her heart. When she got married to him, she thought her life would become miserable during these 2 years. But after noticing his care, she began to think that getting married to him was not at all bad. Now, she was even more determined to win his heart so that she could spend the rest of her life with him. After breakfast, he passed a white pill to her and said, "Take this." Zara looked down at the pill, and her face turned pale. It was the same emergency contraceptive pill he left the following day after sleeping with her that night. His words crushed her hopes mercilessly that she built up just now. She was too naive to think that he would be ready to spend life with her. The sweetness of her heart turned instantly to bitterness. Nicholas's expression turned gloomy to see her hurt expression. He rose from the chair and said coldly, "Listen carefully, Zara. I don't want to bring a child between us during these 2 years. It is good for you as well. At the end of the term, you can freely go without any back pull. Besides, I don't love you, and I will never fall for you. Be obedient to me and stay as a loyal wife. I will treat you well." He pushed the pill towards her and added, "Have it. Zara's heart was bleeding. Tears started gathering in her eyes. However, she refused to shed them in front of him. It took her whole to send the tears back. Taking a deep breath, she mustered a smile and looked up at him. "Don't worry, President Grantham, I am not interested in having your baby either." She took that pill and swallowed it. Then she drank a mouthful of water and smiled back at him. "You don't have to worry about next time. I will take care of it." Nicholas frowned and peered at her. He had complex feelings in his heart to hear her last words. Looking at her unwavering gaze, he was certain that she was serious. Although he didn't want a child from her, he felt discomfort to see her not willing to bear his child. It was the same feeling that he felt when he saw her walk out of the boutique last day. He hated that feeling. He turned around and dashed out without a word. Zara kept looking at his departing figure until he was out of her sight. Eventually, a few drops of tears rolled down from her eyes. It was the weekend. Zara went to visit her mother and brother in the morning. After that conversation that morning, Nicholas never came home for 2 days. Zara didn't know where he was spending the night. Even though he promised her he wouldn't sleep with another woman out there, she still had a doubt. She couldn't stop thinking about him spending time with Sophie or another woman. Her stomach churned with this thought. She just wanted to get out of the villa. It was also the day she would go to the banquet with Isaac. This was another reason she didn't want to stay in the villa. By the time Isaac came to pick her up, the darkness had already consumed the Bay City. She went out of the apartment and saw Isaac leaning over his black Mercedes with his arms across his chest. His handsome appearance was even more appealing in the black suit he was wearing. If truth be told, he was not less good-looking than Nicholas. He was as tall as Nicholas. However, Nicholas's physique was muscular, and he looked stronger while Isaac was lean. Nicholas's face was stoic and cold, whereas Isaac was vehement. Zara couldn't help but stop in her tracks to admire him. She also couldn't stop comparing him with Nicholas. But quickly she regained her senses. How would she compare someone to Nicholas? She wondered why she was thinking about him at that time. She shook her head and marched to Isaac. Isaac, on the other end, froze to see her. She looked heavenly beautiful. The pink gown suited her beige skin tone perfectly. Her bare shoulder was shimmering under the light. The delicate makeup further enhanced her beauty. She was approaching him slowly. Isaac's eyes were glued on her. His heart was beating faster and faster with every step she was taking towards him. He wished if he could run to her and hold her in his arms. The woman he loved for 8 long years was in front of him, but he was still unable to invoke his courage to confess his feelings to her. His fingers on his sides trembled slightly. "Hi, did I make you wait so long?" Isaac came to his senses to hear the question. He pulled back his eyes and smiled awkwardly. No, it's only a few minutes." He couldn't stop his eyes to look at her and complimented. "You are looking beautiful." "Thank you." Zara blushed and looked down, pushing a few strands of hair behind her ear. She had a light smile on her face. Isaac's hand flew off to caress her cheek, but he quickly retracted his hand before she could notice. He turned around, clenched his fists, and murmured under his breath, "Control." He opened the door for her and made a gesture to her. "Get in the car." Zara smiled and got into the car. Isaac walked around the car and went inside. The car zoomed out within a minute. The journey was quiet. Isaac wanted to say so many things, but he couldn't gather his courage to speak. He only glanced at her from time to time while driving. Zara also didn't open her mouth. She was enjoying the view outside. It took them about an hour to arrive at their destination. It was a luxury hotel. Zara craned to look at the skyscraper. She had no idea how many floors this hotel had. Her trance broke when Isaac opened the door and offered his hand to her. She smiled and came out, taking his hand. They entered together and took the elevator. The elevator stopped at the top floor. There was an enormous banquet hall on that floor. Isaac gestured to hold his arm, and Zara linked her hand on his arm hesitantly. They walked in the hall slowly. Zara looked around and could not prevent her heart from beating fast. All the people wore exquisite dresses. Women wore costly designer dresses, while men wore sophisticated tailored suits. Some were businessmen, some were politicians, and some were celebrities. Zara was nervous. Her grip on his arm tightened a bit. Isaac senses her uneasiness. He looked down at her and rubbed the back of her hand, giving a reassuring smile. "It's all right. I will not leave you alone." "Don't be nervous," Zara nodded, smiling a little at him. However, her nervousness only increased every step she took further inside the hall. "Charity gala is going on here." He leaned sideways to her and explained in his low magnetic voice, "Many well-known guests are present here tonight. Some of my friends are also here. I have told them about you. They are eager to meet the person who saved me back then." Zara was taken aback. She looked up at him and said in a state of stupor, "You bring me here to introduce me to your friends." He chuckled. "Yes, it is partially true, but the main reason is that I want you to get acquainted with these parties. Because you will be my wife in the future." He wanted to add this, but in the end he didn't say it out loud and ended up saying, "Because you are my secretary now." He looked ahead of the crowd and added, "I have to attend many parties like this, and you will join me as my female partner. This will also help you get to know the business community." He looked down at her and smiled. Zara listened to him attentively. She could understand what he was implying. Isaac was new in Bay City. It was obvious that he needed to familiarize himself with the top-notch businessmen and the politicians in the city to expand his business. As she was his secretary, it was her responsibility to help him as well. Thinking in this way, she smiled and said, "I understand. Hey, buddy, finally you are here." They were interrupted by a joyful male voice. They turned their heads to look at the source of the voice and saw a tall, chubby, good-looking man waving his hand to them. He approached them with a wide grin on his face. Isaac also smiled and gave him a big hug. "Hey, sorry, I am a little late." "No problem, buddy." The man hugged him back and tapped on his back. Zara had a charming smile on her face to see them. She guessed that this man was Isaac's friend. Not only Isaac, but his friend was also warm and jolly, unlike cold and unapproachable Nicholas. "Isaac, is she the angel who saved you back then?" The man sized her up, grinning widely. His words pulled Zara out of her thoughts. A blush crept on her cheeks to hear him addressing her as an angel. She smiled shyly and hung her head down. Isaac smiled and introduced the man to her. "Zara, he is my friend Noah, a well-known neurosurgeon in this country." Zara raised her head and looked up at the man. Before she could say anything, the man laughed and said, "Nah, you are exaggerating. I am not as famous as you think." Isaac chuckled. "She is Zara, my angel." Isaac looked at her dotingly and added the last two words in his mind. As he didn't know her name earlier, he named her Angel, and his friends knew about it. Noah stretched his hand to her and greeted, "Hello, Zara. Nice to meet you." Zara smiled. Shook hands with him and smiled, "Hello, Dr. Noah. Nice to meet you too." Noah laughed heartily and said, "Call me Noah." He patted the back of her hand and added, "It is that we just meet with each other face to face, but we have known about you for so long." Isaac used to say, "Noah." Before Noah could say further, Isaac pressed his shoulder and squeezed out his name through his gnashing teeth. He was well aware of Noah's shrill nature. He feared that Noah would blurt out everything in excitement. Isaac was still hesitating to express his feelings to Zara, fearing that she would reject him. He didn't want Zara to find out about his feelings right now. He would confess to her later when he gathered enough confidence. He thought. He cast a meaningful look at Noah and asked, "Are you alone? Where is our hero?" "He is." Noah turned his head to look at Isaac, but his eyes caught the glimpse of Nicholas standing a little farther away from them. Ah, there he is. The smile on his face broadened. Nicholas heard Noah when he called Isaac a few minutes ago. He was also eager to meet with Isaac's angel. He was excited to hear Noah calling Isaac and followed him. However, his steps froze on the track to see Zara with Isaac. He thought Isaac would bring his angel, but he showed up with his secretary. He wondered why he didn't bring his angel. But Nicholas didn't waste his time thinking about it, as he was busy admiring Zara. She looked pretty in the pink dress. Her delicate, sleek neck was clearly visible as she held her hair up. Her skin looked like shimmering gold under the light. Nicholas couldn't avert his gaze from her. She was looking beautiful. The smile on her face increased her beauty even more. He was amazed to see her, but at the same time he was a bit uncomfortable seeing her smile. She never smiled at him like this, but she smiled at others. His friends were also smiling and talking to her. He couldn't hear them though. Suddenly he saw Noah patting her hand. His face became dark and his hands clenched on his sides. He didn't like Noah's action. He stared at their hands with his furious eyes. Then he eyed Zara. Instead of taking her hand off, she was smiling. Nicholas was even more enraged to see this. This woman, he told her to be loyal to him, but here she was flirting with other men. This thought was sufficient to drive him crazy. Hey Nicholas, come over here. See who we got here. She is Zara, Isaac's angel.